Welcome to Strange Reads, I'm David, and today's story is First Law by Isaac Asimov. Isaac Asimov lived an incredible life. Delving into his achievements is like jumping down a deep, deep rabbit hole. I wanted to say robot hole, but producer wouldn't let me.
So lying.
But who does the editing, eh? Isaac Asimov was born in Petrovichi, Russia, to parents Anna and Judah Asimov on an unknown date between October 4th, 1919 and the 2nd of January 1920. Isaac settled on the 2nd of January. When aged 1, Asimov and 16 other children contracted double pneumonia. Only Asimov survived. Shortly after his illness, his sister Marcia was born in 1922, and then his brother Stanley in 1929. Deciding that the US would be a better place to raise his family after the Bolshevik Revolution, Asimov's father moved the family to New York on the 3rd of February 1923. Isaac Asimov said of his father, "In Russia, he was part of a reasonably prosperous merchant family, an educated man looked up to by those around him for his learning. In the United States, he found himself penniless and virtually illiterate, for he could not read or even speak English. He turned his hand to any job he could get, and after 3 years had saved enough money for a down payment on a small mum-and-pop candy store, and our future was assured." Asimov spent his early childhood in Brooklyn. The candy store offered him an endless supply of newspapers and magazines to read, including pulp science fiction magazines, a library of works he otherwise couldn't have afforded. These publications provided the impetus for his lifelong love of literature. His mother enrolled him in first grade, a year early, by claiming that Isaac was born on September the 7th, 1919. He attended the Boys and Girls High School, Brooklyn, New York, and would graduate aged 15. Asimov received a scholarship to Sethlow Junior College, where he studied chemistry. A unique and bright student, he completed his master's degree in chemistry at Columbia in 1941, and later obtained a PhD in chemistry in 1948. During his studies, World War II raged across Europe. Asimov worked as a civilian chemist at the Philadelphia Naval Air Experimental Station during these years. In 1939, he sold his first story, Marooned Off Vesta, to Amazing Stories. Probably best known for his robot stories, Asimov started dabbling with the topic around 1940. They would later be collected in I, Robot. Asimov married Gertrude Blugerman in 1942. They had 2 children, David and Robin. Isaac and Gertrude would eventually divorce in 1973. 2 weeks later, he married his second wife, Janet Jepson, a psychiatrist and science fiction writer. Together they wrote the Norby Chronicles, a series of 10 children's sci-fi books about Norby the robot. In total, he's credited with writing or editing over 500 books and writing 380 short stories. Asimov's most famous work is the Foundation series, the first 3 books of which won the one-time Hugo Award for Best All-Time Series in 1966. In 1977, Asimov suffered a heart attack and by 1983 required a triple bypass surgery at NYU Medical Center. Blood transfusions used in the operation were HIV positive, and Asimov contracted the illness. He died in Manhattan on April 6, 1992, aged 72. Due to feared AIDS prejudice, his true cause of death wasn't made public until 10 years later, when Janet and Robin Asimov agreed the story should be known. Doesn't the title of this story carry so much more weight without the first law? That's okay, but first law, ooh, chills. Here comes First Law in its entirety. It's a super short story, so no summary required. Mike Donovan looked at his empty beer mug, felt bored, and decided he had listened long enough. He said loudly, "If we're going to talk about unusual robots, I once knew one that disobeyed the first law." And since that was completely impossible, everyone stopped talking and turned to look at Donovan. Donovan regretted his big mouth at once and changed the subject. "I heard a good one yesterday," he said conversationally. "About..." McFarlane in the chair next to Donovan said, "You mean you knew a robot that harmed a human being?" That was what disobedience to first law meant, of course. "In a way," said Donovan. "I say, I heard one about..." "Tell us about it," ordered McFarlane. Some of the others banged their beer mugs on the table. Donovan made the best of it. "It happened on Titan about 10 years ago," he said, thinking rapidly. "Yes, it was in 25. We had just recently received a shipment of 3 new model robots, specially designed for Titan. They were the first of the MA models. We called them Emma 1, 2, and 3. He snapped his fingers for another beer and stared earnestly after the waiter. "Let's see, what came next?" McFarlane said, "I've been in robotics half my life, Mike. I've never heard of an MA serial order. That's because they took the MAs off the assembly line immediately after what I'm going to tell you. Don't you remember? No, Donovan continued hastily. We put the robots to work at once. You see, until then, the base had been entirely useless during the stormy season, which lasts 80% of Titan's revolution about Saturn. During the terrific snows, you couldn't find the base if it was only 100 yards away. Compasses aren't any use because Titan hasn't any magnetic field. The virtue of these MA robots, however, was that they were equipped with vibro detectors of a new design so that they could make a beeline for the base through anything, and that meant mining could become a through-the-revolution affair. And don't say a word, Mac. The vibro detectors were taken off the market also, and that's why you haven't heard of them. Donovan coughed. Military secret, you understand. He went on. The robots worked fine during the first stormy season. Then at the start of the calm season, Emma too began acting up. She kept wandering off into corners and under bales and had to be coaxed out. Finally, she wandered off base altogether and didn't come back. We decided there had been a flaw in her manufacture and got along with the other two. Still, it meant we were short-handed. Or short-roboted anyway. So when toward the end of the calm season, someone had to go to Kornsk, I volunteered to chance it without a robot. It seemed safe enough. The storms weren't due for 2 days and I'd be back in 20 hours at the outside. I was on the way back, a good 10 miles from base, when the wind started blowing and the air thickening. I landed my air car immediately before the wind could smash it, pointed myself toward the base and started running. I could run the distance in the low gravity all right, but could I run a straight line? That was the question. My air supply was ample and my suit heat coils were satisfactory, but 10 miles in a Titanian storm is infinity. Then when the snow streams changed everything to a dark, gooey twilight, with even Saturn dimmed out and the sun only a pale pimple, I stopped short and leaned against the wind. There was a little dark object right ahead of me. I could barely make it out, but I knew what it was. It was a storm pup, the only living thing that could stand a Titanian storm, and the most vicious living thing anywhere. I knew my spacesuit wouldn't protect me. Once it made for me, and in the bad light, I had to wait for a point-blank aim, or I didn't dare shoot. One miss and he would be at me. I backed away slowly and the shadow followed. It closed in, and I was raising my blaster with a prayer when a bigger shadow loomed over me suddenly, and I yodeled with relief. It was Emma too, the missing MA robot. I never stopped to wonder what had happened to it, or worry why it had. I just howled, "Emma baby, get that storm pup, and then get me back to base." It just looked at me as if it hadn't heard, and called out, "Master, don't shoot, don't shoot." It made for that storm pup at a dead run. "Get that damn pup, Emma," I shouted. It got the pup all right. It scooped it right up and kept on going. I yelled myself hoarse, but it never came back. It left me to die in the storm. Donovan paused dramatically. Of course, you know the first law. A robot may not injure a human being or, through inaction, allow a human being to come to harm. Well, Emma too just ran off with that storm pup and left me to die. It broke first law. Luckily, I pulled through safely. Half an hour later, the storm died down. It had been a premature gust and a temporary one. That happens sometimes. I hot-footed it for base, and the storms really broke next day. Emma 2 returned 2 hours after I did, and, of course, the mystery was then explained and the MA models were taken off the market immediately. And just what, demanded McFarlane, was the explanation? Donovan regarded him seriously. It's true I was a human being in danger of death, Mac, but to that robot there was something else that came first. Even before me, before the first law. Don't forget these robots were of the MA series, and this particular MA robot had been searching out private nooks for some time before disappearing. It was as though it expected something special and private to happen to it. Apparently something had. Donovan's eyes turned upward reverently and his voice trembled. That storm pup was no storm pup. We named it Emma Jr. when Emma 2 brought it back. Emma 2 had to protect it from my gun. What is even first law compared with the holy ties of mother love? Science fiction writers often hint at future inventions, societal changes, and the evolution of humankind. But few have impacted an entire genre and field of science to the degree of Isaac Asimov and his 3 laws of robotics. First Law was first published in Fantastic Universe magazine in October of 1956. Eventually, it found a home collected with other Asimov stories in The Rest of the Robots, and later The Complete Robot, where you would probably find it today. Isaac Asimov originally wrote the story for inclusion in John W. Campbell's 1941 Probability Zero project for Astounding Science. Campbell's new department looked to publish very short stories, but passed on First Law. Asimov saved the story until Fantastic Universe eventually picked it up. Some of the best clues to Asimov's inspiration for First Law are found in his footnotes for The Rest of the Robots. Here, he points out that First Law is told by Donovan and hints at the character being an unreliable narrator, maybe telling a tall story at the bar to ease his own boredom. It was Donovan, and I'm not responsible for him. In The Complete Robot, he says the story is intended as a parody and is not to be taken seriously. However, as a writer, Asimov expressed an interest in finding ambiguity in the grey areas of his laws of robotics, which first appeared explicitly in Runaround. These laws became implicit in robot stories, and Asimov believed that they contributed to the rise of lovable robots, such as C-3PO and R2-D2.
Where do you think you're going? Well, I'm not going that way.
His positronic robot stories fall into two groups, those involving Dr. Susan Calvin and those that deal with Gregory Powell and Mike Donovan. The latter two would field test robots and often run into trouble with them. In Alien, Special Order 937 is a classified retrieval order given by Weyland-Yutani to Science Officer Ash, who is later revealed to be an android. The order states all other priorities are rescinded, overriding protective protocols and allowing the android to kill the crew. Ash's attack on Ripley is erratic and implies a profound inner conflict, such as disobeying First Law. By Aliens, in 1986, Ripley is understandably android-phobic. Bishop tries to reassure her, saying,
"It is impossible for me to harm or by mission of action allow to be harmed a human being. You sure you don't want some?"
Terry Pratchett's The Dark Side of the Sun. A robot, named Isaac, explains that it is permitted to use minimum necessary force against humans if directly ordered to do so, and cites the 11th law of robotics, Clause C, as amended. And finally, always a series to be cognizant of the zeitgeist, in the iDobot episode of The Simpsons, Professor Frink builds a robot which cites the first law.
He is subject to Isaac Asimov's laws of robotics. With the sci-fi and the so many books, not too many good. My robot is programmed never to harm humans, you see, only to serve them.
He knows just how I like my martinis. Full of alcohol.
Ah, robot hole.
Still not funny.
Sort of is. A little bit funny. Isaac Asimov has a huge catalogue of stories, and if you have a favourite, we'll probably revisit him again in Season 2. So leave your suggestions below in the comments. Please like the video before the end credits pop up and it becomes a bit of a hassle to manage all of your options. Here they come now. Discover more speculative fiction tales in one of our other episodes. Don't be a stranger, subscribe, and become a stranger. And remember, keep it strange. It's a lot of strangers.